long to embrace, to include in my own short life all that is accessible to man. So speaks Russia's foremost storyteller and playwright. Other writers have since equaled Anton Chekhov's energy and courage. None has surpassed his humanity. Anton Pavlovich Chekhov, grandson of a serf, was born in Taganrog, southern Russia, January 17, 1860. The little house where the Chekhov family lived has been preserved. In this provincial setting, Chekhov spent his childhood and his youth. Chekhov's father owned a small grocery store, but was more interested in violin playing and icon painting. The father alternated between affection and despotic cruelty towards his family. From his father came his artistic talent and his obstinacy. From his mother came Chekhov's love of nature and his compassion. From morning to night, the family struggled to keep the grocery store solvent. In addition to serving as a salesman and cashier in the store, Chekhov studied the tailor's trade and sang in the church choir created by his father. In the store, Chekhov waited upon Russians of all classes. The way these people looked and talked lodged in his memory. He learned to mimic their behavior and their speech. Mimicry, in Chekhov's case, may have been a substitute for the games other children play. For the boy who had no childhood, the Taganrog High School seemed like another kind of prison. Here, students were treated like petty criminals. Round little windows were cut into the classroom doors. Through them, supervisors would spy on the pupils' behavior. The grades of pupil Chekhov Anton of the 5th class. There are C's and occasionally even D's. Though business duties interfered with homework, his grades gradually improved. Between chores, young Chekhov found the time to write sketches and plays and acted them out with his brothers and sister. His favorite part was that of the pompous official in a cutaway coat with a full beard. He found himself adept at writing satirical stories and poems. But theater was the strongest passion of the future dramatist. At 13, he attended a performance of Offenbach's La Belle Hélène at a local theater and became a regular visitor. Chekhov would arrive here hours before the beginning of the play in order to get the best seat upstairs in the gallery. Here he would cry over the fate of Ostrowski's heroes. Here he would watch comic sketches, musical comedies, and melodramas like Uncle Tom's Cabin. In 1876, when Chekhov was 16, his father's business failed. The family fled to Moscow, leaving him to complete his studies at the high school. Lonely but undaunted, young Chekhov worked as a rehearsal coach to pay for his tuition. He sent every kopeck he could spare to his impoverished family. In 1879, he was graduated from high school and rejoined the family in Moscow. Now he needed a profession. Inspired by a German physician who had treated him during an illness in Taganrog, he enrolled as a medical student at Moscow University. At the same time, to support himself and his family, he began to write for the popular comic magazines of Moscow and St. Petersburg. He was paid by the word and wrote easily and swiftly without a thought to becoming a serious artist. He wrote out of his memories of childhood and from his observations of Moscow life. His stories were printed under various synonyms. Brother of my brother, man without a spleen, Chekhov, and he signed his high school nickname, Antosha Chekhonta. Anton Chekhov's first book, The Tales of Melpomene, appeared in 1884. It was a collection of stories about the theater. At the time, it did not appear as important as the medical degree he received in the same year. Chekhov spent the summer months with his family at a friend's house near Voskresensk in Moscow province. Today it is the city of Istra. Here he worked as a physician in a local hospital and continued to write. Now he stored up impressions of rural life for his stories. Here, among the beauties of the countryside, his love for Russian nature developed. Here also began his friendship with the painter Levitin, who, like Chekhov, loved the countryside around Moscow. Memories of the Istra River and its people appear in one of Chekhov's liveliest stories, The Bubo. The frailties and humor of ordinary people, remembered from childhood, seen on his medical rounds, were captured in a second book, Motley Stories, which appeared in 1886. Chekhov's ability to circumvent Tsarist censorship is at its zenith in his story Sergeant Prishibiev. In the guise of satire, the story exposes the reactionary political and social climate of the 1880s. The censors ordered changes in the text, but Chekhov's indictment of bureaucratic despotism made Sergeant Prishibiev a household word throughout Russia. Laughter and mockery were Chekhov's weapons in his lifelong war against mediocrity, greed, and barbarism. His laughter resounds gaily in the one-act play, The Wedding.
Голова у меня что-то разболелась. Должно к непогоде.
In this scene, the bridegroom pressures his mother-in-law for 2 lottery tickets, promised as part of the dowry. He doesn't need the tickets, of course, but he won't allow himself to be swindled. And if he doesn't get the tickets, he will take it out on the lady's daughter. After all, he is a noble person. Chekhov's one-act play, The Anniversary, is another example of his delight in twitting bourgeois proprieties. A provincial woman refuses to believe that the bank is not the same as the government pension bureau. She is owed 24 rubles 36 kopecks, and she wants the banker to pay it. Nothing he says will convince her that the bank is not the pension bureau. The woman turns the bank's Jubilee celebration into comic chaos.
Ну, нечего, своей жене постукай. Я губернская секретарь, со мной не очень. Да как ты смеешь, скважина!
Chekhov began to take his writing seriously after the noted author Grigorovich sent him an emotional letter and a photograph with the inscription, "From an old writer as a keepsake to a young talent." In 7 years, Chekhov's labors had brought his family from a Moscow basement to this elegant house with bay windows. Chekhov called the house his chest of drawers. He conducted a medical practice here, but his income came largely from writing. Here were created the tales The Steppe, A Dreary Story, the play Ivanov. How Chekhov got any writing done was a mystery to his friends, for they thronged the house day and night to be near their gay and irrepressible host. Chekhov used to say, "The more people I have around me, the easier it is to write." But he was not unaware of his responsibilities as a writer with an ever-widening circle of readers. "I would like to be a free artist and nothing else," he said. "I look upon tags and labels as prejudices. My holy of holies is the human body. Health, intelligence, talent, inspiration, love, and absolute freedom. Freedom from violence and lies, no matter what their form. Among Chekhov's visitors was the composer Tchaikovsky himself. Tchaikovsky invited Chekhov to contribute a libretto to an opera entitled Bella, which Peter Ilyich intended to compose. And Chekhov dedicated his collection, Gloomy People, to the great composer, inscribing the book, "To Peter Ilyich Tchaikovsky, from the future librettist." A writer is a man bound by contract to his duty and his conscience, said Chekhov. In the spring of 1890, at the age of 30, Chekhov responded to his conscience by undertaking an unprecedented journey to the Tsarist penal colony on the island of Sakhalin in the Pacific. Sakhalin was an island of horrors, celebrating all aspects of human humiliation and suffering. Chekhov wanted to see the truth for himself and to tell all Russia about it. At that time, the railroad ended near the city of Tumen, and there stood Siberia. Now it was necessary to be jolted 2,500 miles farther across Siberia in a springless carriage. Even for a completely healthy person, it is a difficult journey. For Anton Chekhov, already suffering from tuberculosis, the journey may have been a death warrant. After weeks of hardship, Chekhov came to the shores of the Yenisei, the mighty Siberian river. His words resound prophetically today. On the Yenisei, life began with a moan, but it will end with a boldness the like of which we have not seen even in our dreams. On this shore is Krasnoyarsk, the best and prettiest of all Siberian cities. And on that shore, he wrote, the mountains which remind me of the Caucasus, just as smoky and pensive. What a full, intelligent, and daring life will one day light up these shores. The island of Sakhalin. Alexandrovsk Post. The small house in which Chekhov lived on the island has been preserved to this day. On Sakhalin, Chekhov, with his characteristic thoroughness and diligence, began to study penal colony life. He conducted a census of the entire population of the island. In one of his letters he wrote, I made the rounds of all the huts and spoke with each person. I already have notes on about 10,000 convicts and settlers. I don't know what will come out, but I've done quite a bit. It should be enough for 3 dissertations. These are some of the photographs showing convicts at work, which Chekhov brought back from the island of Sakhalin. Chekhov published his findings in the magazine Russian Thought and in a book called The Island of Sakhalin. Just like Sakhalin, Russia seemed to him a prison with wardens and iron bars. Everyday life was a triumph of tyranny and brute force over man. Perhaps the most devastating result of his journey was the story Ward Number 6, one of the most terrifying stories in all of Russian literature. One reader, young Lenin, later wrote, I couldn't sleep. I had the feeling I was the one locked up in Ward Number 6. In 1892, Anton Pavlovich Chekhov moved to Melokovo, a small estate which he had acquired near Moscow. It was early spring, and the Chekhovs, one generation removed from serfdom, now occupied an estate of their own. After the purchase, Chekhov wrote, I don't have a kopeck left, but I rationalize it like this. Money is only a means to live the way one wishes. The years at Melikovo mark the full blossoming of Chekhov's genius. Chekhov may be the greatest master of the short story in all of world literature. Many of his stories equal in depth and richness the content of a whole play or even a novel. His manuscripts and notebooks describe his approach to the writer's task. For Chekhov, brevity is the mother of talent. To write art is to condense life. Only what is intrinsic and archetypal remains. The writer must strive for total objectivity. Chekhov wrote, "Fiction is called fiction because it draws life as it is in reality. Its purpose is absolute and honest truth." Chekhov's curiosity, compassion, his concern with insignificant ordinary men is nowhere more evident than in his story, The Grasshopper. The hero, Dr. Dimov, is spiritually gentle and tireless in his devotion to medical research. Dimov's wife, the grasshopper, understands neither his beauty nor his strength. To his wife, who couldn't care less, Dr. Dimov describes a day in the hospital where men's lives are at stake.
Такие-то вот доктора решительно не интересуются ни историей болезни, ни причинами ее возникновения, и больной часто погибает.
One must treat the patient, not the disease, Dimov says.
Мудров прав. Лечить надо не болезнь, а больного.
Chekhov was apolitical throughout his life, but one of his heroes says, "I feel that if I am a writer, then I am compelled to speak about the people, about their sufferings, about their future. I am compelled to speak about science, about the rights of man." For Chekhov, the rights of man meant the needs of his next-door neighbors. At Melikovo, he dug wells, planted trees, battled epidemics, helped the hungry, participated in a census of the population. He traveled dozens of miles in order to give medical help. And with his own means, Anton Pavlovich Chekhov built schools for peasant children. He himself bought the lumber, drew the construction plans, watched over the work. This plaque commemorates the building of one such school in 1898. The peasant life at Melikovo enriched the writer with a profound knowledge of rural Russian reality. Impressions of Melikovo served as the basis for the story cycle, The Peasants, The New Dhaka, In the Ravine. In the tale, The Peasants, is this unforgettable scene. Because the family has failed to pay its debts, the samovar, its only decorative object, is taken away. The peasant appeals to the people for help. Wherever Chekhov went, gaiety and good fellowship followed. His estate at Melikovo was not at all like a Turgenev property. There was no sense of the ancient, the antique. No, it was a new low house without a formal style. And there were new plantings all set into the earth by the owner himself. At Melikovo, Chekhov wrote the story, The Man in a Shell. Recalling his school days, he created an unforgettable portrait of the malevolent school inspector who hates young people, who seeks to perpetuate conformity and superstition. In the film version of The Man in a Shell, the inspector spies on the young teachers. He disapproves of the teacher's embroidered shirt. He disapproves of the teacher actually carrying books around. And now the teacher is even riding one of those newfangled bicycles. This kind of behavior is no way for young people to ensure their fortunes. In this building at Melikovo, in the summer of 1896, Chekhov wrote his play, The Seagull. The seagull is the symbol of the indefatigable striving of a man toward a better, toward a beautiful life. In the seagull is revealed Chekhov's cherished thought: only the one who is capable of the deed is victorious. Chekhov probes the silences between people, their inability to communicate their true feelings to each other. This private silence in which we live proved incomprehensible to the producers of the play in St. Petersburg. The play was a failure. The Moscow Art Theater, formed in 1898, took on the task of staging the seagull as Chekhov himself intended. The founders of the group were not fully sure they understood Chekhov's intent, but they felt impelled to try. The men who brought Chekhov's production to life were Konstantin Stanislavsky and Vladimir Nemirovich Danchenko. Olga Knipper, later to become Chekhov's wife, performed one of the main roles in The Seagull. She recalls opening night. Then, when the third act ended, there was suddenly silence. A few seconds passed, and suddenly something happened as if a dam had burst. And there began a kind of madness, as when you cease to feel that you have a body, a head, legs, that everything has flown together. And there was a kind of mad exulting. The curtain, it was not lowered. The audience and the stage became a single thing. We stood there as if we were drunk. Everyone had tears streaming down his face. We embraced, we kissed. There were excited voices in the audience saying something, demanding that a telegram immediately be sent to Chekhov, to Yalta. The Seagull was rehabilitated. Chekhov was established as a major dramatist.
Нет, это чрезвычайно интересно. Михаил Львович каждый год сажает новые леса. И ему уже прислали бронзовую медаль и диплом. Он хлопочет, чтобы не истребляли старых. Если вы выслушаете его, то согласитесь с ним вполне. Он говорит, что леса украшают землю, что они учат человека понимать прекрасное и внушают ему величавое настроение. Леса смягчают...
Chekhov's second dramatic masterpiece was Uncle Vanya. Its theme is beauty which has been lost in vain. Its dream is of free creative labor. Beneath the placid surface of conversation, Chekhov shows us the despoilers victimizing the good, the gentle, the innocent. Chekhov's heroes stand for a culture that is vanishing before the onslaught of mindless progress. In this scene from Uncle Vanya, Dr. Ostrov describes his concern with saving the forests to Elena, who will steal him from the gentle, adoring Sonia. Chekhov speaks through Dr. Ostrov when the doctor says, "Man is endowed with a mind and creative force in order to augment that which is given to him. But up till now, he has not created, but has destroyed. There are fewer and fewer forests. The rivers are drying up. The wildlife has disappeared. The climate is spoiled, and with every day, the earth is becoming increasingly barren and ugly." See how you're looking at me with irony? And everything that I'm saying doesn't seem serious to you, and well, perhaps it may be that it is in fact eccentricity. But when I pass by the peasants' forests, which I saved from being cut down, or when I hear how my young birch, planted with my own hands, sways in the wind, I realize that the climate is, to some extent, in my power, and that if man will be happy in 1,000 years, then I too will be to blame. At 38, Anton Chekhov was still the actor, the mimic, the clown, who liked nothing better than to hole up in his country house with a room full of friends. He was the host who took care of everyone's needs, save his own. He was the classic example of the doctor who neglects his own treatment until his illness reached an advanced stage. His doctors persuaded him to leave Melikovo and resettle in the warmer south, near the sea, in the city of Yalta. Here Chekhov built the house in which he was to spend the last 5 years of his life. It became a mecca for his friends. In Yalta, in this room, Fedor Shalyapin sang Russian folk songs to Anton Pavlovich. Anton Pavlovich loved to rest on this balcony. From here, beyond the now thickly grown trees, a magnificent view opened out to Yalta, to the open sea. In Chekhov's study, everything has been preserved exactly as it was during the writer's life. Chekhov was visited at Yalta by the most prominent figures of Russian literature and art. Leo Tolstoy. He had deeply influenced Chekhov. He saw in Chekhov's stories and plays a compassion similar to his own. In 1902, Tolstoy lived in Gaspry, not far from Yalta. Tolstoy felt the mantle of Russian literature had passed on to Chekhov. He kept repeating to Chekhov, "You are Russian, yes, very, very Russian." Maxim Gorky. A deep friendship bound him to Chekhov. Gorky was a dear and welcome guest in this house. They would spend whole days together. In 1902, the Tsar refused to sanction Gorky's election as a member of the Academy of Arts and Sciences. Chekhov resigned his own membership in protest. What drew Chekhov and Gorky together was their sense of common origins. They were a new breed, their work pointing toward the future. But they had built on the generation that had preceded them, on Tolstoy, Turgenev, and Dostoevsky. With Gogol and Pushkin, these remained Chekhov's favorite authors. Chekhov knew he was dying, but he refused to feel self-pity. He used to say, "An artist must always work, must think ahead, because otherwise he cannot live." In 1901, Chekhov wrote here his third dramatic masterpiece, The Three Sisters. It is his darkest play, but Chekhov permits his gentle people a faint glimmer of hope. Tusenbach says in this scene from the play, "The time has come. An immense happening is imminent. Fierce, virulent storm is being prepared. It is going on and is already close at hand. It will soon blow away the indolence from our society, the indifference to labor, the rotten tedium. I will work, and in 25 or 30 years or so, everyone will work. Chebutkin says, and I won't be working." Tusenbach replies, "You don't count." After the first performance of The Three Sisters, the Art Theater sent Chekhov this bronze carving as a memento of the actor's triumph. At this desk, Chekhov wrote the stories In the Ravine, The Lady with a Pet Dog, At Christmas Time, and The Bishop. In the year before his death, Chekhov wrote his final, most hopeful story, The Bride, a story expressing his faith in women and their ability to change their lives. In the film version of The Bride, Sasha says, "Oh, dear Nadya, if only you had listened to me, if only you had gone to study. Gradually, not a stone will be left of your city. Everything will fly topsy-turvy. Everything will change as if by magic. And there will be here enormous, magnificent houses, wonderful gardens, fountains, unusual, splendid people. The important thing isn't that, but the fact that every person will have faith, and every person will know what he is living for. My dear, my darling, go. Show everybody that you are sick of this gay, sinful, stagnant life. Show it even if it's only to yourself. Chekhov more than once conversed with Tolstoy and Gorky on this telephone. Dispatches from the local telegraph office were read to him on this telephone. After opening nights of his plays at the Moscow Art Theater, Chekhov received a bevy of telegrams. Telegrams would start arriving in the evening when I was already in bed, Chekhov related. I would wake up every time and run to the telephone in the dark, barefooted. I would get very cold. Then hardly had I fallen asleep again when the telephone would ring again, and then again. That was the first time that my own glory did not let me sleep. Next to the study was Chekhov's bedroom. Illness forced him to go to bed, but he would continue to work, continue to write. This ancient chiffonier had belonged to Chekhov's mother. It served as the prototype for the respected cupboard, which Gayev addresses with a solemn speech in Chekhov's last play, The Cherry Orchard. Luba, you know how old this cupboard is? About a week ago, I opened the bottom drawer. I look, there's some figures burned in there. The cupboard was made exactly 100 years ago. How do you like that? One could even finish celebrating an anniversary. True, it's an inanimate object. But all the same, all the same. After all, it's a bookcase. Yes. After all, yes. Dear respected cupboard, I hail your existence, which has for already over 100 years been directed at the bright ideals of good and justice. Your taciturn call to fruitful work has not slackened in the course of 100 years. Keeping up in this generation of our family courage, faith in a bright future, cultivating in us the ideals of good and social consciousness. Yes. The Cherry Orchard illustrates Chekhov's dictum, let the things that happen on stage be just as simple and complex as in life. All is good cheer on the surface, but a way of life is being destroyed forever. Yepidokov, the clerk, brings flowers from the gardener. Gossip about the weather. There is a frost this morning, yet the cherry trees are in bloom.
Квасу мне принесешь?
Слушайте, Иван Алексеевич.
The atmosphere of the Cherry Orchard is elegiac, but Chekhov called it a comedy. He knew that despite the destruction of the orchard in the last act, life would endure. At one time, here on the site of Chekhov's house, there was a wild hillside, dry land as hard as flint. Chekhov cultivated this garden with his own hands. He used to say, if each person could do what he wanted on a piece of his own land, how beautiful our land would be. In his 44th year, on July 2nd, 1904, Anton Pavlovich Chekhov died at Badenweiler, a German health resort. He had just finished telling his wife a funny story. During his life, he had written over 800 stories, more than 4,000 letters, and a handful of dramatic masterpieces. In these pages, we can still hear Chekhov's devastating laughter at everything which is inimical to human happiness and freedom. In The Three Sisters, Chekhov said, "When we're gone, men will fly in balloons, change the style of their clothing, discover a sixth sense, and perhaps develop it. But life will remain just the same, difficult, full of mystery, and happy."